Okay, so it looks like we are live. Hi everyone, welcome to today's Product School Talk. Thanks for joining us. We teach product management at our 6 campuses in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and New York. To learn more, you can go to our website, productschool.com. For today, we have another awesome guest for you. Our host has a very cool backstory as she went from working at a 50,000 person company to one with less than 50 employees. So we're going to hear about her experience in that very shortly. But first, I'd like to welcome Prachi.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Cassandra.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, super glad to be here and share my experience with everybody.
Awesome. So you started out at product over at Bell, which is a huge company. Can you talk more about that, how you broke into product management and about how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually, going back to my education, I studied mechanical engineering, and I realized that, I didn't really want to work with cars or turbines, and I was really drawn to software. So after school, I joined a consulting company, learned a lot about software there, and then took a leap into product management from there at Bell. So at Bell, I got the opportunity to launch a web app for our cable TV service, also launched an app on Apple TV, which was really cool. It was first in Canada.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's been, the transition from consulting into product management was definitely an interesting one, but because I was kind of familiar with what Bell does, I was a customer and things like that, it really helped to make that transition easier.
Right, very cool. Awesome. And you have a presentation for us today, correct?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. Well, you get that ready to share your screen and everything. I just want to let everybody know. So following her presentation, we're going to open up the floor for Q&A. So you can type in your questions on the chat box right next to the YouTube video. And we'll take those questions right after. So the floor is all yours.
Perfect. So, as Cassandra mentioned, I went from a big company to a small company. So really, this is almost a showdown between a corporation and a startup. So a little bit, one second. So I'm actually from Toronto in Canada, and like Cassandra mentioned, worked at Bell, which is a big telecom company in Canada. And now I work at a startup called Street Context, which is basically disrupting the way content is flowing within capital markets. So it's really very different from what I've done before. So what I'm going to talk about today is really those two experiences, but go deeper into what do you actually learn at a corporation versus a startup, and then dive into, which should you choose, or like which one's better. So before we start down that path, I kind of want to talk about, well, what is a corporation and what does a startup really mean? Usually when people talk about these companies, they look at the number of employees or how much money they're making. While those are very fair comparisons, I actually like to look at it from a product market fit perspective. So what I mean by that is, has a company found users who actually want to pay for the product that they're selling? So on one side of the spectrum, you have startups where they're still trying to figure that out. They may not necessarily have any users paying for their product. And on the total opposite spectrum is a corporation which has been around for a while, lots of users, lots of revenue coming in. So if you can imagine Uber, when it first began as a company, it was trying to figure out, hey, do people actually want to pay for a ride through their app? Do they want to call a taxi on their phones? But now I would, actually call it a corporation for this presentation, because they've definitely figured out that that's a need, and they've been able to fit that product and market together and make some revenue off of that. So let's dive into, what do you actually learn at these type of companies. So let's start with the corporation. The first thing really is intuition. So because corporations have, large number of users, you can see the impact of your decisions much faster. And that really helps to build your product or business intuition. So because you have such huge scales, you can immediately tell when a feature that you built is going the way you had hoped or not. At a startup, when those numbers are small, the small numbers, it's hard to use that as a proxy for what will work for a large customer base. So, in research, they usually say the greater the sample size, the better, because you have less uncertainty in your results. So while I was working at Bell, I actually revamped the onboarding of our mobile app, and we moved from 3 sort of presentation-like screens at the beginning of the app to help the user walk through those features. And we noticed that not only did our customers discover those features, but they actually started using it. So we changed behavior. And the reason why that helped is because it helped us understand that, hey, the decision that we just made works at scale. And that knowledge is actually really helpful at a startup because you don't have that data. So you do have to make some upfront guesses, and it's really helpful to have that kind of knowledge when you get into it. The next thing at a startup is really about asking the right questions. It's probably one of the hardest things a product manager does. But the great thing about corporations is you have usually multiple product managers, and you tend to work closely with them. So you can actually observe what kind of questions they're asking, how are they approaching things, and it gives you a sense for what works and what are the things that you should be watching out for yourself. I mean, I still remember my very first bug meeting as a product manager, and I was paralyzed because I couldn't figure out a good way to figure out which bug do we work on first. Thankfully, my peer was with me, and I was kind of observing her and figured out, based on the questions she was asking, what mattered most to the company, and then figured out how to actually prioritize. That's not necessarily the case at a startup where you'll get that opportunity to work so closely with another product manager. The other point about a corporation, though, is they're so risk averse that you're basically forced to ask a whole bunch of questions. There's going to be VPs and directors always questioning and prodding you. And then that helps you understand, what are the things that you should be asking in your day-to-day to make a product successful. So when you're starting out as a product manager, especially, those 2 things are super helpful in your career. The next thing at a corporation is actually organizational awareness. So like I was saying, corporations are huge. I mean, Bell is over 50,000 employees spread across Canada. And each team is working in their own silos and gunning towards a functional team-oriented goal. In fact, sometimes their objectives are in direct conflict with what you're trying to achieve. So the likelihood of conflict in general is a lot higher in a corporation. I remember my time where I was working on a product, and I was working with the customer support group. And what they do is actually measure the time a call center rep spends on a call with a customer, and they're trying to minimize that call. So what they tend to do is create all their training material to be super efficient. But as a product manager, you realize, does this actually make sense for a user? Maybe not. So it's really learning how to work with people who have very conflicting objectives. How do you get them on the same page, and how do you actually get them to help you execute on product? And the other big thing about corporation is you also figure out who's going to push back, who's going to actually champion your ideas, who are the people who get stuff done. And having that kind of organizational awareness helps you become a product manager, because at the end of the day, your goal is to ship product. And if you can get a better understanding for how people work, that will help you even more. So those are 3 key things about corporations. If I let's look at a startup now. So at a startup, the big thing is you learn that your actions have consequences. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all, actually. What I mean is, because there's so little people and the hierarchy is very flat, you are directly responsible for a lot of things. There's no more VPs or directors questioning you or making the big decisions for you. You're literally in the driver's seat and helping the organization move forward. And this realization can be both pretty overwhelming and rewarding at the same time. So when I joined Street Context, there was a clear need for a product manager, which is why they brought me on. And what I noticed was the team was looking for someone to help them set direction, to get organized and execute. And within 2 to 3 weeks of me being there, I actually started to notice the moods of the employees changing and actually starting to feel like they had direction and something to work towards, which was extremely rewarding. But it made me change the way how I do my job, because I solely am responsible for the success. Well, not solely, but one of the key players in the success of this team. And it's definitely a very interesting mind shift that you have when you come to a startup. The next thing is all around weaknesses. So the big difference that you've probably heard between a startup and a corporation is that at a startup, you get your hands dirty and you do whatever it takes to ship out product. You delve into a whole bunch of things because there may not be potentially anyone else to do that. And this is quite true. But what happens with this is you start to realize what are the areas that you may not be so good at. So while I was at Bell, for example, I was never directly responsible for customer-facing material other than the product itself. And even in the product, a lot of the featured names or copy we would run by our brand team. When it came to Street Context, we don't necessarily have a brand team yet. We don't, have a huge marketing team that can help me figure out what's the best copy out there. So when we launched a big feature, I remember that first time when it came to educate the user and how to use it, I was a little paralyzed. I was like, I can't think of anything, any words or any nice way to explain this feature to our user. And the next day, actually, I came in and noticed the designer had kind of taken a look at it and basically redid the thing. And not only did it sound brilliant, but it also was like super useful for the user. So it helped me kind of realize, potentially where my weaknesses may lie, because you're dabbling into so many different things. And the great thing about that is you can take that and start focusing on your strengths. And that's hugely important because a startup also is so small, there's people out there helping you to make sure the product is successful. So when you focus on your strengths, you become a better product manager, and you are then, bringing those skills and picking out people who can help you solve for those weaknesses that you've got. And the last thing at a startup is really you learn how to adapt, and how to adapt fast. So startups move super, super fast. The direction can change within a day. I've already seen that happen, at Street Context. And because of that, you learn how to work in an environment that doesn't have a lot of information. So there's a lot of ambiguity. And as a product manager, you've got to figure out, how do I take what I don't know and actually help the teams execute, which is a very hard thing to do, because at a corporation, you've actually figured out exactly what your users want for the most of the time. You know what direction the company is going in. In fact, the direction is coming from top down through many layers. But at a startup, you've got to be so comfortable with ambiguity that it's truly a skill to be able to get comfortable, get your influence powers in and still lead the team, even though you yourself may not be sure as to what the data is saying. So that's a pretty big thing that you learn at startups. So, when it comes down to it, which is better, like which to choose, the one thing I would say is the key thing here is really time it takes to learn the PM craft. So as you can see on the slide, if I put startup at one end of the spectrum and corporation at the other, if you are starting your career as a brand new product manager, you don't have a lot of time at a startup to learn that craft. You are expected to come in and just execute. So literally within my second week, I was already executing a street context. I have never had that anywhere else in a corporation before. And there's a lot of risks being taken, and each person that they hire has got to have a certain skill and be able to execute. So corporations, because they're moving so much slower, they can give you that time to catch up and to observe and learn from others and really soak it in. So when it boils down to it, there's a lot of different things that you're learning at both types of companies. They're not always mutually exclusive. I mean, you can definitely learn intuition at a startup too. When it boils down to it, it's really about what stage of your career are you at, and do you just want to throw yourself in and figure stuff out yourself, or do you want to have a little bit of time and learn from other product managers? So I don't think either one actually is better than the other. I truly believe that it's good to have a mix of experiences, because what you learn at one place you can bring to another. And so, yeah, my personal perspective is one is not better than the other, that you should probably have experience in both. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. It's really interesting transition to go from such a big company to a startup. For you. What was the most exciting challenge that you faced when you moved into startup?
For me, it was, sorry, I'm just gonna, oh, there we go.
Oh, hi.
It was definitely the piece where you're thrown in and everything is a lot of stuff, you have no idea what the heck is going on. And you're trying to just figure stuff out with very little, I wouldn't say support, because I did get a lot of support, but you're really the champion for what you're working on, and you've got to figure it out yourself.
Right.
And so when I first came in, I was asked to execute very fast. And within 2 weeks, you barely even know the people that you're working with. So I actually had to lead a meeting where for half the company, and I barely knew these people.
Oh,
so that was probably the biggest challenge, leading a meeting and facilitating it when you don't really even know who you're working with. So that was pretty challenging. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks again. So guys, the floor is open for questions. So go ahead and type in your questions. I saw we already had a couple come through, so I'm going to pick one out from the ones that we already have here. This one is from Nageesh. Hi, Prachi. How did you manage to join a company as a PM coming from a software engineer background? How were you able to convince the hiring manager that you have the PM background experience?
So I don't have a software engineering background, actually. Right. I have a mechanical engineering background. And if you know anything about mechanical engineering, you get one course in coding in your very first year. I feel that product managers don't necessarily need to know coding. I mean, yes, I am a little bit technical. Do I know the ins and outs of coding? I really don't. Where I was the reason why I was able to transition from consulting to Bell was knowing the company inside out and also the product. So I was lucky in that Bell was actually one of my clients, so I knew how the company operated. I knew the challenges it went through. But more importantly, I was I still am a consumer of their products, so it helped me understand the product really well. And so for them, those were kind of the key things. But the most important thing was, do you have the customer focus? So when I worked at Bell, our VP asks same question to everybody, and he's really trying to test, do you put customers first? Do you put users first? Are you always thinking about them as the very first thing? And once they see that and you're able to prove to them of that, I think that transition will, or you'll be able to convince them better. Yeah.
Awesome. Here we have another question here from Nisha. What kind of product management theories do you use, such as Lean or any others that you prefer to use?
Hi, Nisha. So, I was having this conversation with the manager a while earlier, and I was actually saying I don't use any theories personally. And I was trying to reflect as to, some of the products that I have pushed out recently hasn't done successfully. And I was asking myself, why is that? And it's not that you shouldn't look at those theories. Those theories are really good and help you create mental models. But at the end of the day, it kind of boils down to really two questions that you should always be asking, and they're the what and the whys. So why are we doing something? Do we have a logical reason for it? And what are we going to do about it? So it's more around understanding the strategy behind whatever it is that you're doing first, and then looking at what are the different types of solutions that you can use to help fuel that strategy forward. So again, I don't actually use any specific principles like that in my day-to-day, at least.
Okay. Awesome. I just saw quite a few questions come in here. So from Gil, do you think an MBA is very useful to have to pursue a PM track if you already have a technical degree, or can you learn those MBA skills on the job?
So I don't have an MBA degree. I have only an engineering degree, and I would say that I don't think it's necessary for sure. I think product manager as a role is probably one of the only roles where you learn a lot more on the job than you do in a textbook. So, you can read as much as you like on these principles and articles, and actually you should, because they help. But to really understand and learn the craft, you've really got to be able to do it. So MBA will probably help you, but I don't think it's necessary.
Right, and something that we definitely always say too is in order to, when you're looking for a job or trying to transition into product management, it helps to do the job before you start looking too. So
yeah,
definitely agree. Here we have another one. So we'll say this one from JJ. So are you responsible for business development as well in your position?
So at the current startup, we're actually looking at a new product right now. And I am not specifically responsible for business development. That's mostly our CEO. However, I am involved in things like distribution, pricing, and user interviews. And those will definitely fuel or help in the business development area.
Okay. Awesome. And this question comes from Preet. How important is it for a PM to be a subject matter expert of the domain?
Hi, Preet. So one of the things that actually Google really talks about is hiring PM generalists. So if you ever interview at Google, you'll notice that they never ask you about a specific product. They like to hire generalists. And if you look at my own background, I went from consulting to working on a TV product to now working on software for capital markets. I personally have never worked in capital markets. I don't actually even have friends in capital markets. So it's not very important to know the domain. Again, it all boils down to answering those questions of the what's and the whys, the strategy behind things, because there's probably a lot of people in the building who can help you come up with solutions where you don't need to. I think your job as a product manager is to help answer, what are you building, why are you building it, when do you build it? And if you can do that, then you'd be a successful product manager, and you don't need to have domain expertise. It will help though. It will definitely help, but you don't need it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, those are the key questions too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here, this one comes from Michael. So Michael asks, how do you do product discovery? What are some of the validated learning techniques you recommend?
Hi, Michael. So what we're doing that currently. What we're actually doing is user interviews. Those are the most important things, I think, when it comes to product discovery, especially when you don't have a product at all. Then the most important thing you can do is talk to your users. There's a really good book by Steve Portigal. I believe it's called Interviewing Users. And he lays out all the best practices in terms of how you should ask your questions to users. How do you frame it such that you're removing biases? And to me, that's really all about when you have an idea, looking at what kind of problems people have, and positioning your solutions for those problems and seeing whether they use them or whether they agree. Once you've actually got a product, I think it's basically the same process, but now you can actually start having data in terms of are people using it. So the biggest thing is being able to answer the question, are people using it and why? So even if they're not using it, you've got to really understand why are they not using it. And I truly think that unless you ask the users themselves, the only thing you can do is infer. So user interviews is key to product discovery, I would say.
Right. No, absolutely. And then what are your preferred approaches that you would use for prioritization for features or products? And this question comes from Devin.
Hi, Devin. Prioritization, one of the most fun parts of product management. So I think it really depends. And what I mean by that is there's definitely the very standard way, which is how many users is it impacting? How much does it cost or effort required to build something? Those are kind of the two standard ones. But then there's always a layer of, especially if you have a mature product, then it's important to look at the marketing aspects as well and see, can you market this feature? And if you market this feature, can you get revenue? So layering on that revenue aspect is really important. And one of the things I learned here was when you're at a startup, you may have some really strong advocates for your product. And if they are really requesting for a specific feature, you may still want to build it no matter what, because they're going to then advocate for your product and you're going to get more users.
Right.
So at the end of the day, it's all about looking at users, prices, in addition to all the other standard prioritization techniques that people use.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time that we have for questions. We do have one more that I did kind of want to bring up since we're talking about user experience. This is from Nathan. How much of user experience knowledge do you use in your day-to-day work? Or do you have a dedicated UX, UI design team there with you?
Hi, Nathan. We definitely have a design team here, and I rely on them heavily. However, I do provide a lot of feedback when designs do come in. And not just feedback, we have a lot of debate and talk about, what is a good user experience. If you are, I forget where I read this, but someone said that, if you love products and if you're always watching them, then you'll be a good product manager. And I think it's a little bit true, because once you start paying attention to the products that you love and why you love them, that will help build that user experience kind of intuition. There's also some great books like Design of Everyday Things and a lot of great resources that you can read to help build your knowledge. I think as a product manager, it's really, really important that you understand those principles so that you can have a constructive debate with your design team on those aspects.
Awesome, great. Thank you for answering that last one. And thank you so much for your time today. Before you go, any final advice for aspiring product managers?
Yeah, I think coming back to the topic, I would say if you're an aspiring product managers, don't discount corporations. I know there's a lot of excitement around startups usually, but there's a lot that you learn at corporations. So even if you're unsure, I would say, go for it, give it a try, and see how you like it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you again for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for joining us and having such great questions. If you guys are near any one of our campuses, like I said, in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and New York, we host PM events every week. So every Wednesday, Thursday, you can come out and stop by and see the campus and and check them out. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and so you just do a search for Product School and you'll find us there. So thanks so much again, and enjoy the rest of your days.